The Beast of Buckingham Palace by David Walliams. Britain, the year is 2120, 100 years in the future. The kingdom is dark. Britain has not seen sunlight for 50 years. The government has been overthrown, and once again the king rules the kingdom from Buckingham Palace. Still home to the royal family, it is now also a fortress. No one can get in or out. Part 1. The Coming of the Beast. It was noon and the sky was black. There had been darkness over the kingdom for half a century. For many years before, the people of the earth had not taken care of their home. They had burned down all the forests, reducing every last tree to ash. They had pumped the rivers, lakes and seas full of waste and killing all the fish. They had dug deeper and deeper under the ground for oil until the planet was hollow to its core. Eventually the earth took its revenge. The ice caps of the Arctic and the Antarctic melted. The floods were so mighty that whole countries became submerged underwater. Violent earthquakes shook entire cities to the ground. All that was left behind were piles and piles of rubble. Volcanoes erupted, pumping billions of tons of ash into the air. Without the sunlight, the crops withered and died. Nothing could grow. The kingdom was plunged into an eternal winter. It was the only world Alfred knew. He was already 12 years old, but had never ever seen sunlight. Often he dreamed how it must have been to feel the sun on your face, or even run through a field of tall grass, or swim in a sunlit sea. But it was just that, a dream. The boy had seen pictures of the sun in books and marvelled at it. A perfect circle of gold. Now that the moon and stars had become visible too, Alfred would spend hours and hours imagining how the night sky must have looked with 1,000 little lights twinkling through the dark blackness. He was one of those children who liked nothing more than being with his imagination. In truth, he had little choice. He had been sickly all his life. Soon after he was born, he became ill. As a baby, Alfred had not been expected to survive, but survive he did. Just. The child was as pale as snow and as thin as dust. He wore thick glasses to aid his poor eyesight. Often Alfred was so weak he had to stay in bed all day. Thank goodness all around his bed were piles and piles of books. Books, books and more books. Books about animals, books about space, books about trees, books about dinosaurs, books about books. Books about history were his absolute favourite. The trouble was that there was a strict curfew in the building where Alfred lived. Night was the most dangerous time. That was when there was most chance of an attack from the outside. Lights had to be out at 8 o'clock sharp, by order of the king. Anyone caught with lights on would be severely punished. Punishments were brutal in the kingdom. Those in power had returned to medieval forms of torture. The Iron Maiden, the breaking wheel, the pillory, the rack, the rat's dungeon, the head crusher, the iron chair. Despite their strict rules, the boy loved his books so much that he would carry on reading by candlelight under his bed covers. The night our story begins, Alfred was doing just that. He was reading a weighty leather-bound book about the kings and queens of Britain through the ages. The first one was known as Alfred the Great. He'd become ruler an impossibly long time ago, in 871. The boy was named after that first king. But it was hard to believe that anybody would ever describe this Alfred as great. He felt anything but. As the boy was devouring the story of the beheading of King Charles I in 1649, a deafening sound rocked the room. Kaboom! Alfred dropped his book. Thud! And his candle, he very nearly set his covers on alight. Whoosh! Smothering the flames and blowing the candle out. Whoosh! He pulled off his bed covers. Whoosh! A huge explosion outside had illuminated the boy's bedroom with glowing red, orange and yellow light. Alfred slid out of his bed and, using all his strength, limped over to his huge bay window. Just those few steps left him painfully out of breath. He leaned on the window frame to steady himself. Alfred's bedroom was so high up on the top floor. From here he could see far across London. A building was ablaze, but not just any building. It was St. Paul's Cathedral. The historic structure, perhaps one of the most famous in the world, had been destroyed. Its huge white dome cracked as if it were nothing more than an egg. Huge plumes of black smoke billowed high into the air. Oh no, thought Alfred. No, not St. Paul's. He had seen many London landmarks destroyed over the years. Nelson's column had been toppled to the ground. Crunch. The London Eye had plunged into the River Thames. Splish. The Royal Albert Hall had caved in after a bomb had blasted it to pieces. Boom! However, none of these was as sacred as St. Paul's. This was a new low. The cathedral had been built after the Great Fire of London in 1666. The glorious structure had miraculously survived the Blitz, when Nazi bombs rained down on London during World War II, but now it was burning down to the ground. Alfred's next thought was revolutionaries. This had all the hallmarks of one of their attacks. The boy had never met anyone from the top secret organisation, but the Lord Protector had taught him about a lot of them. From what Alfred had been told, the revolutionaries hated the fact that power had returned to the king. They wanted to overthrow him and behead him, just like the Roundheads had done to Charles I during the English Civil War. The revolutionaries stood only for death and destruction. That is why the Lord Protector said they needed to be crushed at all costs. Rat-a-tat-tat! There was a burst of machine gun fire. No! The distant sounds of shouts. Ah! Was that a scream? Alfred shivered. As much as he wanted to look away, he couldn't. Every day there were attacks all over London, but explosions in this scale were rare. The boy pressed his hand up against the cold, thick glass and looked out at the devastation. This was the kingdom Alfred would one day inherit.